Hi, and welcome to the regularly scheduled podcast for Gordon Clark Discussions. This podcast is the official shop talk for the Gordon Clark Discussions Facebook group. We're focused on news and latest discussion topics in social media, in addition to, of course, standard theological topics. I'm your host, the BFG, a.k.a. the big fan of Gordon Clark, a.k.a. Romans 9:18. Thank you for joining. Don't take what you read on social media too seriously. Having said that, let's get into this episode's content. First, I'd like to give a shout out to the people who are on social media, especially the Gordon Clark Discussions group. My thanks to our conversation starters, our rising stars, and our top contributors. Let's take a look at today's item. Amyraut and the Hypothetical Universalism. Amyraut was a French philosopher and theologian who changed from studying law to theology after reading Calvin's Institutes. He wrote a controversial, brief treatise on predestination in 1634 around his idea of a universal atonement and economic view of the Trinity. The Father sent Christ to hypothetically redeem the entire world, but it was only effectual when the Spirit acted in the heart of the sinner. Christ's death was an objective act that established the ground and condition for mercy and pardon. But Amyraut thought that since the death of Christ came logically prior to the redemption of the sinner, that it was hypothetically prior to a particular effectual call. In this he disagreed with the unitary decree of God advanced by the scholastics, which held that all whom God elected, and those alone, were particularly redeemed by Christ's substitutionary death. Amyraut's position was subtle, nuanced, and sounded Arminian to many ears, and so he was tried for heresy, but not convicted. The controversy affected the French church for the rest of his life. His outlook was humanistic, and subjective features of tone, outlook, and mode of inquiry made him probably more like Calvin than the later scholastic rationalists who came to dominate Reformed theology in the century after him. But though in some subjective ways Amyraut was likely closer to Calvin than the later scholastics, that alone doesn't make his four-point Calvinism more doctrinally faithful to Calvin, and therefore closer to the earlier Reformed tradition than the scholastics. The errors and abuses of scholastic doctrine are well cataloged elsewhere, but it must be thought that they, by and large, got it right on the creedal formulation of the doctrine of limited atonement. It seems that Amyraut's thought was influenced by exposure to and peaceful relations with his theological school and those others outside of Calvinism. That is, Lutherans, other Reformed schools, and even Roman Catholics who admired Amyraut's ecumenical ways and softer polemics. So, what to make of Amyraldism or Amyraldianism? Well, I agree with the scholastics. It is not part of Reformed doctrine. So it is fair to distinguish it as not Calvinism. But it's also fair to note that it is a branch or offshoot of Calvinism with a historical provenance and context and backstory that makes it quite close in comparison with other schools of theology. Amyraut disagreed with others over a secondary issue in theology, but otherwise his beliefs were quite close. And during his lifetime, he was seen as one of them by those outside the circles of Calvinism. He fits comfortably at the periphery of Calvinism, along with Richard Baxter, Thomas Boston, the Marrow Men, and others. Therefore, I'm at pains to understand the sometimes highly polemical descriptions of Amyraut as a perversion or as a closet Arminianism or of teaching a false Jesus. It's fair to note the differences between Amyraut and the scholastics. It's not fair to use words against them that are reserved for the enemies of the faith, against people who openly declare against the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. It seems an heuristic demagogy to demonize those who share an agreement in perhaps 95% of their theology. It's the kind of brother against brother rhetoric that has no place among family members in the faith. On a personal note, I've experienced this controversy even among family members in the best of Calvinist circles. For example, one child in a staunchly conservative Reformed family confessed her belief in 4 points. Her studies of the Scriptures were the same as everyone else's in the family. They all read the same Bible, had the same environment and upbringing, saw the same speakers, grew up in the same churches, and onward. There's just no reason to discount her Calvinism as hypo or less well considered, or that she was less careful and scholarly than her other family members. After 20 years, her scholarship led her to confess a form of Amyraldism, and there's just no reason to excoriate or reject her or doubt the genuineness of her Christianity. Now, I recognize that's not an argument for the truth or falsehood of the doctrine she believed. But there is an heuristic presumption among too many cage-stage Calvinists that if one disagrees on a point of theology, the opposition must be less learned or not so serious with their scholarship, or perhaps their theology comes from the fact that they are a false believer or an apostate. For Gordon Clark Discussions, I'm Romans 918.